Adrienne Marie Brown, welcome to the Orgasmic Lifestyle podcast. It's literally a pleasure to have you here in your book. I've been reading at the moment, Pleasure Activism. I'm really
Oh,
enjoying
cool.
it. So many different ideas in it. It's so much to talk about. You're described as many things: a Renaissance thinker, creator, author, social justice facilitator, a doula, a healer. As someone who does many things, which aspects do you identify with the most? And does it change day to day? Or what?
Um, I think every single day, all the time, I'm a writer.
Okay.
Hmm.
Ah. So, about the idea of pleasure activism, the politics of feeling good, you talk about how we can tap into our emotional and erotic desires to organize against oppression. So, how is this possible? Because I think some people think that activism is kind of synonymous with being angry about things. Do you think we can be a pleasure activist in many aspects, or does it depend on the topic?
Well, I mean, I think one of the most important aspects of pleasure activism is that it's about reclaiming pleasure, particularly for those who are in bodies that have been oppressed or marginalized or are seen as bodies that are meant to just labor and not experience pleasure. And sometimes we have to get very angry to demand our right to experience that pleasure, to experience autonomy over our bodies. So I think that it's all woven in, and a lot of what I speak about in the book is that pleasure is not something that happens in isolation. It's tied into being able to feel the full range of your emotions, to be able to process the emotions well so that they're not building up and creating stoppages and blockages in your sense of life or in your body. So it's all connected.
Yeah, I think there's some topics can definitely have a pleasure side to them, but other ones might be a bit more difficult. I think in when we think about feminism, there's like lots of maybe the like in unequal pay and things like that. But for me, I was actually studying feminism at university, and someone from a left very kind of angry organization tried to poach me, and I thought I didn't want to spend all my days like being angry, because I didn't think that was very healthy. And so I decided I call myself an orgasm activist. So I'm kind of a sex
Mhm.
toy designer and just focusing on the kind of more pleasurable part of activism. Could you identify with that somehow?
Well, I think it's a little different, like for most of the communities that I'm writing for, it's not necessarily an option, feeling the anger, noticing that there are things we have to be angry about is not, it's like it's not negotiable. It's just an absolute part of life, in the US to be Black, to be queer, to be a woman. Like there's all these things that are like, I'm going to be angry about these things. And one of the things that I'm always working on is how to harness the power of that anger, how to harness the energy that's flowing into that anger for the use of my life force, right? So I try to harness my anger into creating things. Like I've been writing fiction and I write spells and I write other things and I try to gather all that emotional energy and move it into something else. Um, and then I think inside of organizing, no matter what topic we're focused on, we can make it a pleasurable space to be a part of. So much of why people come into movement space is because it can feel like, oh, finally, other people who are paying attention to the world and who want to make it right. And how do we not be punitive with each other, but really generate a space that feels celebratory, solution oriented, where people can be their whole selves. So there's aspects of pleasure activism that are about like how do we make the container of movement a more pleasurable place to be so that more people want to become organizers and activists. Like you said, like no one wants to move towards something that feels like it's just purely based in anger, right? So you want to move towards spaces that feel like community, and then for every person to also be able to access the sovereignty of their own body and to recognize that that feeling good is actually a part of the lived experience. It's not just that some should only suffer so that a few can feel good. It's
Yeah, I think
actually,
sometimes
we're all wired to feel very good most of the time.
and sometimes we can feel guilty if we feel good sometimes, depending on the upbringing from religion or different cultures.
Yeah, it's a great control mechanism. If people think that things that come naturally and that feel good to them are something that they should feel guilty about or that they need permission from someone else to experience, it's a really great way to control people because those urges towards pleasure are inevitable and natural. They're wired into us. So I always, I'm always like, be in a question if someone who is not in your body and of your body is trying to say something about what you can and cannot do with your body. Probably that person is seeking to control you, and you should be in consent about that.
Definitely. I found the part about drugs really interesting, actually, because I'm kind of a sober person. I haven't had alcohol like for 7 years. I've never really dabbled with drugs. And I used to smoke weed to sleep for 20
Yeah.
years. And it was one of those things that I kind of justified. I kind of took it medicinally, but also there was a pleasure element there. And it was also like a fast
Yeah.
track meditation thing. Then this year I had pneumonia and COVID, and that kind of put a
Oh,
stop to it.
wow.
So
Yeah.
I must confess, it's been like I feel like a sober activist now. But
Uh-huh.
I do know that there's lots of circles who maybe glorify plant medicines and things like that and harm reduction. I think it's a very interesting topic because I'm kind of like looking at it from a very different perspective now. And I just think that sometimes the
Yeah.
pleasure element can be a gateway to the dangers of it.
Well, I mean, one of the things I think is so interesting about harm reduction is that it includes the space for people who are 12 steppers or who are like sobriety is the path that allows me the most presence, right? So if
Mm.
that's what you find is true for you, then it's like, absolutely, by all means, that should be one of the options that is not judged, and it works for you. And maybe it also works for the life that you've lived and how you need to navigate the pain that you experience, right? And then there's other people who are living different lives and navigating their pain in different ways. And the essence of harm reduction to me is always that non-judgmental piece, that it's just like the world creates conditions that people have to navigate a lot of different ways. And one of the things we're always trying to figure out is how do we do that? How do we see people's humanity in all those choices, and then create as many pathways as possible for people to be present. Like I really think that it's, this is one of the measures of privilege for me in my own life is I'm really like, I can tell that the safer I feel in my life, the easier it is for me to access my meditative states. The easier it is for me to access being present in my life because it's wonderful to be present in my life. I have conditions that feel safe around me and I have enough food. I have shelter. I have loved ones. I have people who are taking care of me and loving me. But I know a lot of people, and I've organized with and for a lot of people who were abandoned by their parents or were abandoned by other aspects of society, who have run into a lot of different walls or economic barriers that are structured into the system, who got caught up in the incarceration process too early in life. And I've seen those people, also wanting to have a life that they can be present for. And sometimes that, requires a different medicine. Um, I think what's interesting is in this life, all those paths are available, um, and I think we're still at the beginning of learning how do we actually navigate and find the medicines we need. So much of what the world consists of is actually toxins, fed to us as medicine, fed to us as food, fed to us as drink. Like there's so much toxic material that we're coming in contact with. And I think we're learning more and more about that all the time. It's like how to determine for ourselves what is toxic for us, what is medicine, what is healing.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that because I'm kind of an anti-big pharma person. I'm what a kind of vegan and whole foods, plant-based. And when you analyze, there's so many things that are coming into our food and our medicines that are just very bad for us, for sure.
Yeah, and bad for the planet. I think
Yeah,
about that. It's almost always they go together. And how to be in relationship with like the local produce,
absolutely.
even that SMAP, right? So but it is, it's one of those things like I think it's one of the places where it's like when I think about why I want to redirect people's attention away from violent power over scheming into that deep presence, yes, filled life. In part, it's to create more space for more people to be able to have that agency over what comes in and what goes out of their lives, like over living lives that feel balanced enough that they can be present in them. I think that is one of the great privileges of this century. When I think about my long lineage, I feel like one of the freest people to live. And in this time, even though there's still a long ways to go, but because I'm able to have such agency over my hours and my decisions.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a luxury. I have the same privilege as well. This time is so important. So tell us about the masterclass that you're doing, redefining feminism. Do you think feminism needs to be redefined?
I think that anything, any system, anything that's like, oh, we're trying to take down an entire system here. As we learn more about that system and how it works, we will continuously be redefining. And I think, we see that with feminism in particular. It has such a clear, like, this is first wave, second wave, third wave, this is intersectional feminism and such. We see the ways that it needs to continuously be growing in order to hold the people within it that are growing. And I I'm really grateful that I was invited to be a part of the conversation. It's Gloria Steinem's masterclass. And the way she decided to hold it was to invite myself, Amanda, and Tina to come on as guests and to be in conversation with her, and then each to also offer our own little snippets of wisdom. So yeah, it's cool. I haven't really done television type things before, so it feels like a new place to discuss. What I mostly talked about in that space was pleasure activism, and a little bit about We Will Not Cancel Us.
And what's this? We Will Not Cancel Us? What?
We Will Not Cancel Us is the book that I put out last year in 2020, on the culture of disposability and accountability.
Oh, interesting. And I saw that you said in your blog that the pandemic has been a dance for you and your body. Tell us about this. How is the
Yeah,
quarantine?
so I feel like for most of us, it's been something that's it's had the impact of making a major shift in what is available to us in our world and our lives. So before pandemic, I was swimming all the time and I was in a really good place. I had a really beautiful community of healers that I was working with, an acupuncturist, someone who did fire cupping, someone who did myofascial work, masseuse, somatic body worker. Like I just had a team and I was a part of that. I was doing my doula work and I was making my offers as a healer. And I had a plan to go on this sabbatical and do some reflection on the world after having released pleasure activism and having it be such a massive success. I needed to kind of turn inward. So I had been swimming and taking care of my body and had this team and everything. And I go on this trip. And during the trip, about 2 months into it, that's when the pandemic kicked in a massive way. And I was in Italy, near hot springs, natural hot springs that's there. And I had to come home back to the US because there was a chance that it was unclear whether we'd be able to get back into the country if we waited. And so I came back and suddenly there was nowhere to swim. And it wasn't safe to see any of the people who I had been working with to help navigate pain in my body. And I have arthritis. So the pain just went off the charts, and I started to feel very much like my body was falling apart within and there was nothing I could do. It was just like, I don't know how to navigate this. And so it's been this dance, of one, kind of accepting the body that I am in right now. Like, this is the body that's bringing me through the quarantine. This is the body that's surviving this pandemic somehow. And one of my favorite podcasters, Crystal West from This Is the Read, she said that she was like, how dare you be angry at your body for gaining weight during a global pandemic? Like, your body is keeping you alive during a global pandemic. Like, be grateful. So there was some of that. I was like, even if I'm in more pain, even if I can't go swim, even if I can't do the things I'm used to, my body is still surviving this. And what can I do to dance with it? And so I was like, okay, yoga. One of the reasons I practice yoga is because it's available any place, anytime, and I have a lot of different people who have taught me over the years. Lately, I've been really enamored with the work of Jessamine Stanley. She has a new book called Yoke out, and it talks about the yoga of your whole life, bringing that mindfulness and that breath, that awareness of choicefulness to every aspect of your life. So I started really digging into my yoga practice, really thinking about strengthening and physical therapy. And like, I now feel like I'm back in a place of health in my body. And it's a health that is, there's still more sugar in it that I'd want necessarily. And, it really truly feels like a dance, but I'm able to swim again daily, which is a gift. And I can feel how happy my body is to have that support and slowly start to see healers and others again. But I'm like, wow, I made it through. I bought my own little silicone cups and taught myself how to like do some self cupping.
Oh, cool.
I learned all these like self massage technologies and, just did all these things. You're like, okay, what can I do for myself here? Like, how could I be a comfort to myself? How can I invite my own alignment? Um, yeah, so I'm grateful. I'm grateful to constantly I keep pushing myself to look at my body as a place of health rather than as a place of harm. It really helps me.
I think a lot of people can identify with that, with the pandemic. I think it's really affected a lot of people. And I always envied those people who were doing these home workouts, and, because that took a lot of discipline, because sometimes you just feel like there's so much uncertainty just sitting on the sofa,
Yeah.
and
And
eating
I
became more
found,
of
I
a
mean,
pleasure.
oh yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I also was, I find it really helped me figure out like how to still claim the day. So I still find that like that there's something I need when I first wake up in the morning. I really need to be able to turn straight to practice. So it helps me to wake up and either know that I'm going straight to swim or wake up and go straight to the mat and just land, from dream world into this reality, really get back fully in the body before I start trying to go about doing anything else with the day. And it really makes a difference, you know, waiting as long as I can to look at my phone in the
Mm.
morning helps a lot too. Uh, it's basically a guaranteed good day if I can get in my body before I get on the internet. Right. Um, you know, I feel like the pandemic for so many of us was this invitation, like, what is it that you need to structure into your life to make it compelling enough to want to continue?
Definitely, definitely. And I think I just lived in a hoodie for 2 years, made me think about clothes a lot and fast fashion and things like that. It really, and how much
Mm-hmm.
we waste in general on people and time and things we don't need. Definitely. And another question for you. You recently came out with your first fiction piece, Grievers, a novella about the Black Death during a pandemic that you first began writing in 2012. Was there any parallels between that book and the pandemic that we've lived?
Absolutely. Um, I think anytime there's a pandemic or a plague, an epidemic, there's all the people who are left behind, and there's the unique experience of having lived through a moment where everyone lost someone, everyone lost someone or everyone lost something, some path, some potential future that they thought was going to be theirs. So I feel that inside of the storytelling that I'm doing with this, novel, a trilogy of novellas, is trying to tell the story of a place that um, everyone is touched by the loss, everyone is touched by the grief, and it fundamentally changes who they are and what their work is in life, which I have found to be true for myself. As I grieve people, my purpose also shifts.
And how is your writing process different when it's fiction compared to nonfiction?
Hmm. I think a lot of my nonfiction I've been able to write on the edges of my life, like doing other things. A lot of my work was as a social justice facilitator. So I would, be called into meetings with very, very important people, people who are moving and shaking and changing the world. And I would often write, while they were having small group conversations or when it was a lunch break or something like that. And that was fine for the way I needed to ideate and move the nonfiction work along. I finished a lot of my books that way with just like a short period of time to be in retreat and things like that. So I feel like the difference for fiction was I needed to get lost in the world more fully. It didn't fit on the edge of anything else. And I find that's still the case. I have to give fiction a whole day. The whole day has to be given over to the characters and the story. And when I'm in the process of it, the characters are very active in like telling me, here's the next piece, or here's the next thing you need to understand, or the next argument that needs to be had. So I feel like I really enjoy the fiction writing process. It makes me feel a little bit more free like a little bit more. I'm just like, oh, when I'm writing nonfiction, there's such an effort, even though I know that there's no such thing as perfection or there's no perfect right way to do things. When I'm writing nonfiction, I am pursuing something that I'm like, can I get to the heart of the matter? Can I get to the exact place to help people understand this? And with fiction, there's so much more mystery. It's like, we don't understand this. There's a lot of this shit that we just don't understand. And we still have to keep moving forward. We have to compel ourselves forward into an unknown that feels fairly bleak sometimes, right? It always feels bleak when you're grieving, when you're lost someone that you really loved. The future that doesn't have them is less bright than the future, the past behind you where they were. And I wanted to write about that, like that feeling of the best is behind us. How do we keep moving forward? Can we begin to imagine that there's even better up ahead?
Did you have a plan for the story, or did it kind of like have its own life when you started writing?
Both, and it, that kind of, for me, that process was a dance. I have an amazing teacher in my life, Tanana Reed, who is a Black speculative fiction horror writer. And I was in a writing workshop with her once, and she was like, always make sure you know the short story of whatever larger story you're trying to tell. Like, what is the essence? What's the short story part of it? And I really appreciate that wisdom. So Grievers first came as a short story about two people who'd been abandoned basically in an empty city. And then I realized the protagonist had to shift, just where I needed to tell the story from needed to shift. And that unlocked a whole different section of story, such that I had to storyboard out as far as I could see. And I was able to storyboard out pretty far. But I still, even now, there's some mystery in terms of what's going to happen in the third novella. So I'm like, putting the finishing touches on the second one. And the third one, there's ways that it still keeps shifting in front of me. And I'm excited by that.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine. And do you get any opinions from other people about what to do, or are you going to?
Sometimes, I think that my whole life is, I'm constantly, like, I think any writer is like, you're processing and filtering stuff that's happening in your life and in the lives around you. For that one, a lot of the feedback I wanted was just from people in Detroit, asking a lot of questions of people in and around Detroit, because the city of Detroit is very much a character as well.
So what's the book that changed your life?
Wow, there's so many books that have changed my life. I would say one of them is the autobiography of Malcolm X. I remember reading that book and feeling all of the possibility within it, that, the many, many people that Malcolm was over the course of his life, and feeling in myself, wanting to access that range within myself, wanting to know what the truth, my radical truth was as a human being, and wanting to know what my evolved and spiritual truth was as a human being. So I found that book to be extremely important, and I returned to it many times. And I'd say the Tao Te Ching is another book like that by Lao Tzu. It's referenced in most of my other work as well. And it's just I love how deep the wisdom is in that book, delivered in such brief verse. I feel like I'm always trying to seek that way of being. And when I released Holding Change, which is my book on facilitation and mediation, it was really modeled after the Tao Te Ching in parts. There's sections where I was like, I really want to say, like, how briefly can I say this? Even if it's not quite a verse.
Yeah, I love that book. Another question: what is the philosophy that you live by, or do you have a quote or an affirmation that's central to your
Hmm.
life in general or at the moment?
I'm seeing there's this, which is I am a microcosm of all the possible liberation, justice, pleasure, and honesty in the universe, and I act accordingly. Um, and then lately, I've been walking, I have this little sticky on my desk that capitalism makes all of life work and labor. To be anti or post capitalist is to make all of life pleasure and play.
Oh, that's
And so I'm
fantastic.
really working to do that.
Is that your own affirmation? Is that your?
Yeah,
Oh,
these are
fantastic.
things that are stuck around my desk. I have Gloria Anzaldúa on the wall. I change myself. I change the world.
Fantastic. Yeah, I love to do
Mhm.
affirmations. Great. Okay, so I think that's yeah. So, do you have any tips about how our audience can live a more orgasmic lifestyle? Because orgasmic lifestyle is about reaching the climax in all areas. It's not just a sexual.
Yeah, I would say the to listen for the yes inside of you, and listen for the
Oops. It's just like stopped.
no
Oops.
deep, deep, deepest joy.
Oh,
So,
sorry, the internet just went weird there. You said the
oh,
yes
okay.
inside of you.
So, yeah, I was saying to listen for the yes inside of you, as you move through your life and in every decision, to really like take that moment, place your hand on your gut, and just say, like, do I really want this? Is this part of the miraculous path of my life? And
That's
only
great.
say yes to things that feel like a very clear yes in those conditions. You can't
Sounds
go
like great
wrong.
advice. It's a full
Mhm.
moon tomorrow. Do you do anything for the full moon usually?
Oh, yeah, I do lots. I usually do rituals. I write spells. I like to put all my different crystals out in the moonlight and do moon baths. Yeah.
Cool. I'll be doing the same thing. Okay. Thank you so much. Adrienne
Thank
Marie Brown
you.
will be publishing this on a new moon or full moon
Okay,
sometime.
great.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.